You know, it was once said that you should have a pad beside your bed of a night. So when you wake up with a brilliant idea, you can quickly scribble it down. I've never done that. No, and I usually don't remember my dreams or anything that happens during the night. I sleep very well, which is, I think, a blessing. But I do get sermon ideas. And this morning's sermon comes from my travelling up to Cooma one day. And I don't know whether you realise that Nimity Bell has its own radio station. 93.3 community radio. They have their own radio station there, of all places. Nimity Bell is such a small little place. So I was driving up there, and at that time of the day, in the morning of Sunday morning, they usually have a country and western time. And I heard this song, and I'm hoping that Peter can share that with us. It's called No Charge, and it's by Shirley Caesar. This is courtesy of YouTube. Please, Peter.
My sister's little boy came into the kitchen one evening while she was fixing supper, and he handed her a piece of paper he'd been writing on. And after wiping her hands on an apron, she took it in her hands and she read it, and this is what it said. For mowing the yard, $5. If I make it my own bed this week, $1. For going to the store, 50 cents. And playing with little brother while you went shopping, 25 cents. Taking out the trash, $1. And for getting a good report card, $5. And for raking the yard, $2. Total owed $14.75. Well, she looked at him standing there and expecting, and 1,000 memories flashed through her mind. So she picked up the pen and turned the paper over, and this is what she wrote. For the 9 months I carried you, growing inside me, no charge. For the nights I sat up with you, doctor, you pray for you, no charge. For the time and the tears and the cost through the years, there is no charge. When you add it all up, the full cost of my love is no charge. For the nights filled with gray and the worries ahead, no charge. For advice and the knowledge and the cost of your cottage, no charge. For the toys, food and clothes, and for wiping your nose, there's no charge, son. When you add it all up, the full cost of my love is no charge. Well, you know, when I think about that, I think about the day that Jesus went out on Calvary and gave his life as a ransom for me. When I think on the words, if any man be in Christ, he's a new creature. I like to think of the very man that he shedded his blood. My debt was paid in full. And I want you to know today, when you add it all up, the full cost of real love is no charge.
Thought it was better to watch the pictures than just listen to the music. The cost of real love, the cost of free love. There is a cost, but there's no charge. As I got thinking about that, it was the motivation to talk about what I want to talk about with you this morning. We don't always think about the sacrifices that go into rearing children. We do it because we love them. And on a different plane, I have seen at the other end of life adult children giving up work and going and looking after a parent, an ageing parent. They do it because they love them. But these are two examples of family, and now families are close, and that's important. People who we love, who we really love, we're prepared to make sacrifices for and put them first. One of my favourite TV programs is called Bargain Hunt. Has anybody seen Bargain Hunt on TV? Yeah? A few heads nodding, yeah. For those of you that haven't seen it, it's quite an interesting program in that it's set in England, it's filmed there, and they're really into antiques and things of old age. And they keep all sorts of interesting things. And the whole idea of this program is that there's two teams put together, teams of two people in each, blue and a red team, and there's a compare there. And they give them £300 each to go on a spending spree in either an antique fair, an antique shop, and they challenge them to buy 3 items out of their £300. They don't have to spend it all. They can spend as much or as little as they want, but no more than £300. So they go shopping, and to accompany them they have an expert, somebody who knows the antique industry very well, and he or she goes with them. So in that hour, it's quite quick, and eventually they find 3 items. Now, more times than not, because the items they then take to an auction house and they're auctioned to see if they can make money. More times than not, they make a loss, and some of them considerable loss. And it's a bit sad, but what I really like is occasionally, just occasionally, they choose an item that sells really well. Doubles, triples, 5 times the amount of money they paid for it. And it's a real bargain, and it makes some good money. But as I look at that, what made the money, I start to look at why. What was it about that item that made the money? Sometimes it's about its condition, that it is immaculate, it's perfect, there's no damage, it's really good. Sometimes it's about its age, so it goes hundreds of years old. Sometimes it's just because it's unique. There's not many like it. But quite often, the things that make money are because of who made it. So that the master craftsman has put their name on this object, and that is why it will sell quite well. It's valuable because who made it. When Jesus in Genesis made the first man and woman, I notice in the account that most things he spoke, and it was. But when it came to humanity, Adam and Eve, he got down and formed them out of the dirt. He made them. And then he breathed into them the breath of life. And it says, though, we were created in his image. So we have the mark of the master craftsman, Jesus, on all of us, because he made us. When Adam and Eve chose a different way to God's way, I can see Jesus in the background being devastated by their decision. But they are still his creation, still his works of his hands. We still exhibit his craftsmanship. And I can picture in my mind Jesus saying, they are worth dying for. They are worth dying for. I want to take a leap in time now. I know I'm jumping a bit, but I want to take a leap in time. Jesus is now on this earth. And in the book of Luke is recorded a story that Jesus told. And it sort of challenged the mindset of that day. He was asked a question one day, what must I do to be saved? A person who was well versed in the Jewish law, what must I do to be saved? And as often Jesus did, and it's recorded in Luke chapter 10, often Jesus would answer a question with a question. And so he puts it back on this guy, and he says, what's written in the law? And of course, this person is able to share with Jesus, and this is what he says in verse 27 of chapter 10. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. And love your neighbour as yourself. And Jesus answers him, you have answered correctly, do this and you will live. But the guy wants more, and so he asks this question, who is my neighbour? Who is it? And then he goes on to tell the simple story that we all know so well. A man went from Jerusalem to Jericho. On the road, obviously it wasn't a safe road, because he gets attacked, he's robbed, all his possessions and even his clothes, and he says he's left half dead, which means he's only half alive. He's in a bad way. He's lying there in the gutter beside the road and he's in a bad way. But help is on its way. It's not long before someone comes. Now, how's your memory? I hope you haven't looked it up. Who was first? Who was first? A priest. He's the first one to come along. Tell me about a priest. In a modern day language, what would we call a priest today? A pastor, a minister, professional person? Yeah. Educated person? Yeah. Responsible person? Yeah. What about a person whose example we would follow? Maybe. We find in Jesus' story that when he saw this guy in trouble on the side of the road, he walks on the other side and keeps going. I just hope this guy wasn't conscious to see that, because that would be a disaster when somebody bypasses you and doesn't even offer to help. But anyway, it's not long, and another person comes by, and this time it is a Levite. Levite is, in today's terminology, would be teacher. Yeah, perhaps teacher. Again, educated person, responsible person, a person you would look up to in the community. And again, this person walks on the other side of the road, bypasses this poor chap in a bad way, half alive, in the gutter, and he just goes straight past him. Then, in Jesus' story, there is another chap who comes along. And the only thing we know about him, he is a Samaritan. What do we know about Samaritans? Jews didn't like them. Foreigners to them. Now, we don't know anything else about him, but what we do know is the important part, because when he saw this guy in the gutter, he took pity on him. My version says it took pity on him. He just didn't have empathy. He went and did something about it. He goes over, he attends to his wounds, he helps him as best he can, he gets involved. He takes time. It's a selfless act. I mean, the robbers could have been still there. We don't know. But he puts him on his donkey, he takes him to the inn, which is a local motel, and asks for a room. He puts him in the room. He's still attending to his wounds. He makes sure he gets something to eat. He probably gets him some clothes to wear, and he looks after him as best he can. He pays for the cost, which is 2 silver coins, which I think is a fair bit of money, out of his own money, and he says to the innkeeper, on my way back through, if it costs more, he needs to stay here longer, I will cover it. It's okay, I will look after it. At his own cost, out of his own money. Love, yes, but it cost him. It was sacrificial love. We might even terminology in today's language, random acts of kindness. Have you heard that? It was just so random. But he made sure everything was done that needed to be done for this guy. This man was not his family. It was just someone he come across who was in need. He was, as Jesus put it, a true neighbour, and he was neighbourly towards him. Towards the end of Jesus' time on earth, in Matthew chapter 24, Matthew 24 is very much a prophetic chapter. Jesus gives us an insight into the future and what it will be like before he comes again. And in verse 12 of chapter 24 it says this, because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. As I thought about this is a sad verse. Does it mean that when we get closer to Jesus' coming, there'll be less Samaritans and more priests and Levites? Does it mean there'll be less people willing to make a sacrifice for others? I don't know. I don't have an answer. In John chapter 13, verse 34 and 35, when Jesus was talking to his disciples, he gives them a new commandment. He says to them, a new commandment I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. And by this all men will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. Jesus is perhaps giving an even greater challenge than to just love your neighbour as yourself. Because when we know what Jesus did, that he gave his life on the cross, to love one another as he loves is to make some pretty good sacrifices for that on behalf of others. Perhaps a more modern day example of this sacrificial love is a story I want to share with you, and I know some of you have heard this story before, but I want you to think of it from the terms of sacrificial love. In 1942, when the war was sort of raging in the Pacific, a group of Scottish soldiers in Singapore were taken prisoner by the Japanese at the fall of Singapore. These captives were treated very cruelly, and it wasn't long that they started to just look out for themselves. Survival was sort of the key for them. And they were put to work on a railway, to build this railway. And it was in a jungle setting, so it was hot, it was miserable, they weren't fed well, they weren't looked after well, they were punished terribly if they stepped out of line or did something that the Japanese didn't agree with. And on one particular day, when it came to the count of the shovels, they were 1 shovel short. And the officer just went ballistic. He demanded to know who had thrown the shovel away. And there was all these Scottish soldiers he had there, and he started threatening them for their carelessness or their thievery or whatever they'd done with it. And no one sort of owned up. And it got to the stage where he was going to start killing them unless somebody owned up. And then one Scottish soldier stepped forward and he said, I did it. The officer beat him mercilessly, and sadly he died from his wounds. And his mates picked him up and they carried him away. And it was later on, when they did their second check of the shovels, that the count came right. So the person had died because they had miscounted the first time. He had stepped forward and taken the punishment for his mates because he thought they were all going to die if somebody didn't step forward. What happened with his sacrificial love was it changed the whole atmosphere of not only the Scottish guys there, but this went through the whole camp like wildfire. People started to take notice. They started to look after each other. They started to care. They started to help each other when they were down. It changed everybody, considering as the more they thought about this guy stepping forward and taking the punishment for them and saving their lives, it made a huge difference. Sacrificial love. When the Allies finally overtook this area and captured these guys or freed them, the Scottish soldiers stood in front of the Japanese and said, even though they were like walking skeletons, they said, now is not a time to kill. Now is a time to forgive. So much had this one man changed the whole camp that people saw things from a different point of view. The power of sacrificial love. One of the fruits that the Holy Spirit wants to give all of us when he comes and lives in our lives is to change us into the likeness of Jesus. And one of the fruits of the Spirit, of course, is love. Not just a love for each other, but a sacrificial love, a love that looks out for each other, takes care of each other. How will we express this love? Where will that sort of love take you and me this week? Our love for God and our love for others. There's an amazing song that talks about God's love. We call it Amazing Grace. And it starts off, amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like thee, like me. May this love be our focus, the love of God that allowed Jesus to sacrifice himself on the cross. May this be what motivates us this week. In Jesus' name I pray.